Morena koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. No mai haere mai, ki te kaupapa o te rānei. Tēnā koutou from the far north, the sun is shining on our kaupapa today. We thank you all for joining. We recognise there'll be still others coming in as we go through. However, we've got Annette with us. Her time is very, very special. And we won't delay our starting, so I will start us off now with a karakia. E te hui, whaia te mātauranga kia marama, kia whae take ngā mahi, tūmara, tūkaha, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou ia tātou katoa, te hei mauri ora.
Mauri ora, ora. Tēnā tātou katoa, ai he tautoko ngā mihi kua mihia, nō reira kia koutou, kua tai mai I tēnei ata, I te whakarongo ki a tātou she-hero, Annette Sykes, ngā mihi atu kia koutou katoa. Nō reira, ai ko Lisa McNab tōku ingoa, nō konei, te hiku o te ika, muri whenua, nō te mihi kia koutou ngā tangata, kei te haere mai te whakarongo kia Annette. Nō reira, look, it's my privilege, but bigger still, my pleasure to introduce you to Annette Sykes. I know Annette doesn't need introduction, however, I'm going to make use of the small time I have to introduce you to Annette. As I've said earlier, a shero for me and for many of us who have walked this pathway of mana motu hake. As we know, Annette is an activist and lawyer who has been a staunch advocate of mana motu hake. Annette is of Ngāti Pikiao and Ngāti Mākino hapū descent from Te Aroa. I always add an R on there sometimes, Annette, from Te Aroa, because, you know, we like to claim you as ours, given all the mahi that you've done for our people here in the far north. But Annette is a graduate of University of Auckland and has been a practicing lawyer since 1984. She has her own law limited, her own law firm. She specialises in human rights as a human rights lawyer, and also is a real specialist and a whatever they call you, Annette, Cyclone Sykes, when it comes to the Waitangi Tribunal claims. Annette was very, very instrumental in representing the 17 people arrested on the 2007 New Zealand police raids, has worked extensively alongside Mona Jackson, and I just pay tribute at this time to Mona for all the work that he's done alongside Annette in terms of mana motu hake and the constitutional review. As I've said, there's so much more to Annette's bio, but I want to now hand over this time to our guest speaker. And before I do that, I do just want to share, whānau, that when we had our first conversation around what the content could look like, what the kōrero might look like, might sound like, Annette mentioned the kupu mana. And so I'm going to leave it there and hand it to Annette to perhaps begin our session with that kupu mana as the starting point as we begin. Nō reira, anō kia koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai. To you, Annette, always a privilege, always a pleasure. My shero, Annette Sykes. Kia ora.
Kia ora no tātou, e hui mai nei I rungi te pakaro hohunu o tēnei kaupapa whakahaere. Ko te mihi tuatahi, I tautoko ana ngā kōrero I puta mai ngā rangatira, ngā wāhine rangatira o te tai tokerau. Nō tāmaki makaura hoki Māori, I reira koe ki te āwhenei I ngā mea Māori mai rāno. I te wā te wharerawānanga au, kei reira koe hei hāngai ngā kaupapa, e pāna ki ngā tāngata kore whare, tai noa i tēnei wā kei reira hoki i te wairua ngā whakaaro me pēhea te oranga o te iwi Māori. Kia koe Lisa, ko koe tētahi o ngā tino wahine toa. I tūtaki māu i te wā i mahi koe mō tērā o era o ngā hauora, engari i runga i te whakareia o mana, kei reira māu e pakangāna mō ngā kaupapa hohonu e pāna ki te ao. Ko tākenei mihi whakamutunga, koutou mā i hanga ana tēnei kaupapa. He tino kaupapa i tēnei wā. He wā o te ao. E parakura ana ki tā wāhi ke engari e ngau ana i ngā whakaaro o rātou mā. Kāre tino kaha au i whai i ngā whakaaro o Trump me ona hoa Netanyahu, me o rātou nei mahi tūkino ki ngā iwi o Palestine, me ngā iwi katoa o te pito o te ao. Kei tā pāpauri au hoki, nā te mea kei te noho taiapa tō tātou nei kāwanatanga i runga i te whakaaro ki au nei, kia tautoko rātou i ngā kaupapa i puta mai te International Courts of Justice kei te kino tau atu āhuatanga. Ka huri atu au i tērā o ngā reo, engari kei te mihi kia tātou. I'm sitting today in my house beneath the shores of, or beneath the mountain of Matawhora, where I grew up, beside the shores of Rotonui i kite ai I hinga, Rotoiti i kite ai I hinga, and I just felt that I had to do that because whoever set this session up called it Fireside Chats. And that emerged immediately into my mind and the map in my mind of what is a fireside chat. I was reminded of many of the activists' challenges that we had done under the collective called Te Ahi Kā. It was a movement that was set up at the time of the fiscal envelope and efforts by the Crown to take away the resources of Māori illegitimately, to claim their rights to extract benefits from those natural resources and to deny those resources as part of any treaty settlements. The leadership of that group included the late Tuaiwa Ricard, who I think everyone will remember had a fierce determination to establish an independent state of Waitangi for her people at Raglan, went into occupation of those lands, took on all of the district council and Waikato Regional Council with full might, was arrested and dragged off her land with the late Hana Te Hemara Jackson and Sid Jackson, and a number of 17 other people were with her, including Awupia, her daughter Angeline Greensill, people like Rowley Habiba, the great poet. I just want to recall some of these names because they're no longer with us. And Rowley was someone right to his very end, used to write with passion and evocation of our responsibilities as tangata whenua to care for this country, but to also defend that right to care for this country with every essence of our being. And one of the things that he had the power was the power of the word and the power of persuasion of that word to both conjure up the continuity of consciousness that was embedded in our souls by virtue of our whakapapa to this land, our DNA to this land, but also because of the resonance of Kaikōrerō and the best, I think, of oratory that all of us are exposed to in our worlds just by simply attending marae functions. There was John Hippolyte, who was also a great advocate for unions as part of that, and the first Māori movement for human rights. There was a whole lot of men and women who I don't like the fact that this generation, this new generation, some of them don't even know who Eva Rickard is. And it's really worrying me in the kinds of histories that are still being inculcated into kura kaupapa and to kura iwi that actually don't focus on our histories, that really have a contemporary focus, but actually are missing some of the most important leaders that have challenged the illegitimacy of the New Zealand state and the way it continues to make policies and practices without our even consideration to us. Ahika was a movement that caused a deep kind of division amongst Māori too when it was first set up. It was not treated at all well by people who were in the middle of negotiating significant settlements. I know that when we went down to Ngaitahu, we got served with a trespass notice by the late, by Sir Mr. O'Regan, as he was then. And Eva found it deeply, I think, insulting that he would even raise that for her, because, of course, Eva is a descendant of Ngāti Koata on the top of the South Island, and it has every right in her view to express her opinions about what the Crown was doing, and challenge Kaitahu about that. We went down. It was an interesting night because Hohua Tūngaihe, one of the most wonderful, I think, statesmen of that period, he turned up with every mata waka that was sitting and living in Christchurch. We had over 1,000 people turn up in the hall, and it wasn't a night of confrontation at all. It became a night of wānanga, of how we would assert our tangata whenua status in an environment which was in the name of treaty settlements actually eroding treaty rights. Ken Mayer and I were really nobodies back in that time, but we were people that were working with Sid Jackson, who was one of the leaders in the first Māori unions that had been established. Ken was working as a probation officer, and I was a new legal graduate that had gone to work in my summer school times with Sid and the newly established Māori unions to try and encourage the legal clerical workers people to join. And I remember from that Ahika movement that we were able, by the power of the word that Rolly Habib and many others inspired within our own groups, to actually light little fires of hope, little fires of emotional connection to our lands, little fires that actually reminded of the responsibilities we possess as tangata whenua to care for this country, not to promote anything like war between and amongst those that we've invited between us to live together, but to actually evoke the principles and the values that can guide peaceful coexistence for us. Those fires also saw a huge movement in the fiscal envelope. And of course, the late Sir Wira Gardner was employed by the Crown to try and sell that policy. I remember in Rotorua, my grandmother at that time gave me a korowai to wear that had been worn by one of my ancestors at the Battle of Gate Pa when we marched down Fenton Street with our group to actually show to Rotorua that notwithstanding our conservative history, we needed to be reminded of some of the battles in the past where we had shed blood to fight for our land. And we were also honoured for that time because of our stringent kawa, which doesn't encourage women to take a speaking role, by the late Tamati Wharehuia, one of the greatest leaders of our people, to allow 3 women to speak on our marae against the fiscal envelope policy. Those women I hold in great esteem and awe today. Sandy Morrison from Ngāti Pakawe, Rearangi Hewa from Tūhaurangi Ngāti Wāhia, and myself from Ngāti Pikiao, Ngāti Mākino. Recently I was given a portrait by Reagan Bowser setting out those events, and it actually captured in every way, firstly, the boldness of our tribe to give the right of women to speak on such an important kaupapa, recognising the battle cry that was being put out through the motu needed to have the karanga of women lead that, but also provide intellectual integrity to what was being asserted by the Crown and their theft of our resources. The other important thing was the challenge between ourselves, those of us that were working in Crown, because of course Sir Wira Gardner at that stage was the Chief Executive Officer of Te Puni Kōkiri, and he was greatly respected in his leadership roles because of course he had been leading battalions of men in the army prior to his incorporation into the politics of Kāwanatanga when he left the army. And it showed the tensions that occur between Kāwanatanga and rangatiratanga occur between and amongst us as Māori, between and amongst us as a hapū and iwi, but between and amongst Māori and Kāwanatanga. And that tension requires both diplomatic resonance, I think, to actually find solutions. So to get back where we started, that's what kupu mana means for me. It's a term that was derived from the late Dame Mirasazi when she was talking about Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It was a term where I heard her and the late Sir Bishop Bennett talk about as part of a Waitangi tribunal claim of how we give effect to the preamble of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, because in that preamble set the power dynamic of the relationships between the tangata whenua and their enduring obligation to maintain their sites of power, their obligations to Papa Tuanuku, their obligations to maintain their ways of life, but also to be inclusive in the way they plan for the future of this nation. A nation that should not be trampled upon by the values of racism or white hatred, or the values of capitalism, which actually are about taking the extractive resources of this land to profit, neoliberal strategies, and quite often people that actually have never stepped foot into this land. And so when you read the preamble of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, Mira would always remind in any wānanga on it that one of its key propositions is that we have to stop the lawless Pākehā from bringing values that are foreign to this land in, that aren't about caring for or stewardship of or obligations and responsibilities to future generations, but more about living for the moment and taking for the moment, no matter who you may upset in that moment. And so the two values she used to always highlight in it was, of course, hauhau i te rongo, the desire for peace and good government. But of course, that government was a delegated authority from the rangatiratanga sites of power that existed at that time. And those sites of power were simple things. One of the things about Mira, she always used to remind me of the simple things we need to do in life. You know, go down to the beach and watch the tumbleweed roll across the beach and be reminded of the ongoing strife between tāne mahuta and tangaro for that space on the beach, and how sometimes there's an ascendancy of tāne mahuta's children in keeping the beach space for themselves, sometimes though, and in this time of climate change and the existential climate crisis we have, how the power of tangaro can actually come in and impact on the ways of life of the children of tāne mahuta. And in the simplicity of the images that she invoked, she always used to remind, if that conflict is what you see every day, you must always remember the peaceful times when you're on the beach, when the ebb and flow of the ocean reminds you that you walk on the gravel of those sands. And when you walk on those sands, you're walking and feeling the warmth of your mother. You're feeling and hearing and understanding the internal murmurs of Ruaumoko that's embedded in his mother. And you're capturing the essence of that part of the world, which is really, I think, the ecosystem of Te Taiao, which we all live within. All is interconnected and we all have responsibilities too. And if we take that image back to Te Tiriti o Waitangi in the preamble, then it's a question of honouring those elements, remembering that we should find balance in those elements. It's not about destroying those elements, it's about making those elements of peace and good government work for everyone that lives in this land. And that's the kupu mana, that's the questions of honour, that's the honourable obligations that are deeply cemented within the philosophies of both He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti. It is those matters that we as lawyers should be fighting for, not how much money we get from the Crown, but how in everyday life we can embed the values of caring, of looking after, of ensuring that people have kainga, of ensuring that those homeless have shelter, of ensuring those that are in prison don't go back to prison, of ensuring that in our search for peace, we're not just talking about notional moments of time, we're talking about enduring responsibilities of kupu mana. So when I was a young activist and you're hearing this powerful rhetoric but also inspiration coming from my early times while I was protesting on the marae at Waitangi every 4th, 5th and 6th of February. I could not help but find my pathway to a pathway of providing or fighting for those norms to be constant norms, not just in the lives of Māori, but in the lives of the nation. And as part of that, it's been a natural, I think, occurrence for me, for groups of us that share those understandings to work together. And so I have been very fortunate in my time, inspired by the ahika time of Sid Jackson, who I still see as one of the greatest leaders of this last 50 years, walking with, beside, behind the late Dr. Moana Jackson, because of course, as a philosopher, he was able to capture the essence of those values, to perform, I think, an enormous task that hadn't been achieved in modern times of recovery of our memory of the sites of power that actually existed to enable us to assert our inherited obligations of sovereignty in this country. He often would say, we have the power to decide. We have the power to mediate. We have the power to change. We have the power to determine for ourselves our futures, but also to sometimes walk back into the past, because sometimes the future that is happening is so destructive of our present lifestyles that we have to look to the past for those remedies. Those sites of power are located deep in the institutions of our marae, deep in the institutions of our hapū, and are the reasons why most of us find the glue to happiness. Because I think one of the other things that's not mentioned about Te Tiriti o Waitangi is that it is actually a blueprint for providing for the joy and happiness of coexistence that comes from peaceful coexistence together. So that term kupu mana carries that for me. And there have been many, many people that I've been fortunate to see not talk that, but walk that. One of the most inspiring moments in the last 5 years, particularly in the time of this right-wing ideology that is besetting the world and which is hurting Indigenous populations in the world and causing deep harm, was the time of Tūheitia and Te Pou o Matariki, and his desire for us just to be Māori every day, particularly at a time when our constitutional dynamics were under attack, when we had the audacity of someone who claims Māori heritage, the false dichotomy that he's Māori because he has whakapapa, even though he decries all the values that his whakapapa instills in an individual, to take away the Te Tiriti obligations, to actually rewrite the treaty principles so they become unrecognisable. And that kupu mana that was possessed by our king Tūheitia to draw the Māori, the whakamininga of the motu together, so that there was 10,000 that arrived at Tūranga Waiwai in waves of emotion to actually assert our obligations to each other and to this part of the world, and to find strategies to ensure that we plan our own sites of power, where we give effect to the practices of our own power and the dynamics of the institutions that are concurrently being developed by us. His time, unfortunately, was not long enough for me, but I think the dynamism of that time has meant that the reign of the current queen has been built on a solid platform of kotahitanga, on a solid platform of recognising that our enduring place in this nation as Māori is actually going to go on forever. He had a wondrous way of also linking us to the peoples of the Pacific, of Te Mana Nui a Kiwa, and in actually creating space for those the dynamics of those relationships to find their voice in his hui. He also had a deep, enduring understanding of the needs to maintain relationships with our Pākehā friends. And I've got to say that that's been one of the biggest conflicts that I've had to live with in my whole life. My dad was a Pākehā who deeply loved my mother. His Māori pronunciation would make me die every day when I heard him. He couldn't even pronounce anybody's name, never mind our Māori marae. But I would see him love and cherish my mother, who was a pā dog. She worked at the back of her pā all of her life. Her job was to make sure the manihuri were fed. Her job was to make sure her brothers looked good on the pai. And my dad would be cutting meat in the back with her, and my mum would be doing the dishes with her sisters. And that balance of understanding, of harmonization of role, and forgiving him for his license to mispronounce our names. It was terrible. It's still terrible. I can't stand it. But it's something that I had to forgive my father for, and I couldn't for about 5 years. I wouldn't talk to him as I was requiring myself, my own recovery in a decolonisation space. I also want to move from that Te Pou Matariki to this time of the last 3 years with this coalition, and to look at how that term honouring obligations to each other, kupu mana, is actually being impacted on by the disruptive and deliberate efforts of people who are actually on another agenda, nothing to do with the treaty, but using that as the smokescreen for their agenda to cause division, disharmony, and hatred amongst us. And they have been so unsuccessful in their goals that it will be, I think, obvious on the 7th of November that the attitudes that they tried to embed in our nation have been clearly rejected. Rejected by the churches, rejected by the unions, rejected by women who were denied the right to equity in this government. They will be rejected by all kura, all educational institutions who have been told that they have to erase section 127 Te Tiriti or Waitangi references from the policy fabric which designs their boards of governors. Their efforts to dismantle the single Māori health authority that many of us had spent 30 years building. Lisa, that is such a tragic aspect of the last 3 years. That happened while we were actually, I think, inflamed with anger. But, quite often, sometimes that paralyzes action. And our inaction on that, because we became stuck in a paradigm of fighting within the kāwanatanga constraints. I did, I think, 3 or 4 Waitangi tribunal claims on that matter alone, is something that I think we need to keep in mind as we move forward. How does that relate to our general theme of institutional racism, of disharmony, of our desire to build Te Tiriti futures? I think it really is an exemplar of what not to do. We cannot, after 50 years of moving away from the Hun report ideas of assimilation and making Māori a dead race, and in that time working through activism, collectivism, the strengthening and building capacity of so many people. We've got 1,000 lawyers now. When I started, there was about 11 of us. We've got the capacity building going. So we've got a whole lot of really talented data sovereignty experts working within our tribal institutions. We've got a whole lot of people that are deeply committed to implementing, not just talking about, but implementing strategies like Te Mana o Te Wai that will actually keep their fresh water futures for their populations in place, free of pollution, free from the introduction of pests that will cause distress to the water quality itself, but also to the communities. Because when you start introducing all these pests, they eat the indigenous food, which have been our traditional kai, like kōrero, like tuna. All of those things that have been done deliberately in the first 100 days of this coalition, and now in the last 100 days of this coalition, are reminders of what we must not do. And that's really important to keep in your consciousness. I'm sorry, I have to talk about the state of Māori politics too in the last 3 years. When you're in a fight with sometimes you actually end up fighting yourselves, you eat yourself. And that's what's been achieved by the constant barrage of a kāwanatanga that wants to diminish the mana and the status of us as tangata whenua, of our language, of our ability for our people to care for each other. I call it the kai tangata syndrome. They are literally asking us to fight against them as they eat away at the very essence of the structures of our bodies that are actually giving us power and a continuity of consciousness to the values that I think were implanted into Te Tiriti or Waitangi. And we must reject that kai tangata syndrome, and we must do it everywhere we are. We must do it on the marae. We've got to stop fighting amongst ourselves about who's the best at this and some of us that are old, I'm sorry, and I'm getting to that stage, we've got to give over to the new generation. 60% of the Māori world is under 40. They are highly articulate. They know the language and the practice of artificial intelligence. They know the risks. They are on the world stage as leaders in sport, in music. They are the people that are winning the gold medals and giving legitimacy to sports like waka ama and kiorahi. That generation needs to be given the power that I was given when I was younger too, by late great Sir Graham Latimer. He pushed me onto boards when I was in my 20s. I see too many of us in the older generation, and I'm talking to you if you're over 60 and you're an academic, move on. Get some 30-year-olds to take the place. That's honourable conduct. Stand behind them as their tuara in case they fall over. But live with them, talk with them, allow them to breathe with you. Feel that, yes, it's okay to make a mistake. I will be here to help you when we need to fix that mistake up. And I know it's hard because too many of us had to wait for all of those other old buggers and queers to get off the pai. But we have got to be different. We have got to say, kei te pai, kei konei tātou katoa. And so we need to be engendering the establishment of a Hawaii hautanga that is built on the values of understanding the pursuit of kupu mana, of acting honourably in deed and thought and in practice. We have to build this Hawaii hau on new models of development, not on capitalist models of development. We need to be very aware that our fisheries resource, despite us only owning 50% of the fisheries resource at this time, is subject to scarcity and depletion, and that some species already, like snapper, are actually likely to be not available if we're not careful. I'm really angry, I have to say his name, Honourable Shane James, for his kind of open mining suggestions of his desire to enter into US commitments right now so that they can extract natural resources to make weapons of war. Why are we allowing that to happen without a murmur? That was the announcement this week. It's kind of gone under the radar that our government, who said that they were only in preliminary discussions with Trump's government, have now entered into arrangements to facilitate that. And then I see a company, Rocket Lab, getting the largest procurement arrangement with the Department of War of the United States to extract minerals for the purposes of, making tools of war. And I have to say, for us as Māori, is that really what we want our taonga, our resources, to be used for? And is that really an exercise of kupu mana, or is that really something that is dishonourable? Because we know those weapons ultimately will be used to destroy Indigenous populations in other parts of the world. I want to come back also, as we move forward to this Hawaii Go, to shout out to the teachers of this country. I was brought up in Kawerau, and the first vanguard of school teachers that had come out of teaching college with the late Dr. Ranginui Walker, they were mostly women. They worked day and night. They inculcated reading and writing and maths, but they started embedding philosophies of kaupapa Māori in their reading recovery programs, in their outside programs, so that we had kapahaka movements. You know, we had mostly women running, also the ability to take children to sports we couldn't afford. That was the first vanguard. Then we had the second vanguard of a change with Katerina Mataira, people like Ruka Broughton, people that actually developed kura kaupapa and spent their lives achieving it. Peter Sharples, Dr. Kathy Hughes, the whole lot of them that sacrificed so that we could have the first kura kaupapa. Iritana Tawhiwhirangi has to go down as a legend in our time for her straight, sharp talking, yes, but for her sacrifice for our mokopuna, because her and Tilly really said the philosophies of kohanga reo weren't just about feeding the children the language. It was feeding them the power of our way of life so that we could substitute the ways of life that had actually put us on a precarious space of survival to a thriving future. I have to move to the intemperable whatarangi buniata, tai hakure juri, Ngāti Raukawa's 1,000 years ahead generation, who have turned their backs on the institutions of universities and legitimized their own universities, their own wānanga, their own theories of knowledge and praxis, so that has enabled that they have a significant number of not just Māori speaking orators, but actually Māori ways of life, inculcating every facet of the economic drive of them. That's what kupumana is. It's about being honourable to your ancestors. It's about giving honour every day to the fact that that way of life is not inferior to the Western way of life or to other ways of life that are being experimented on to our children, but showing that the 1,000 years before the arrival of the colonizer was as legitimate and as hopeful and as successful as anything we could bring. And I don't know if I've run out of my time. I haven't even turned to my paper yet, whānau, but kia ora. I'm quite happy to keep on going on the paper at the moment. But
Haere tonu.
Okay. So, we have to pay homage.
Do you want to take a drink of water?
I've got a drink here. Yeah, I've got a drink.
Just while you're having a drink of water, Annette, somebody asked a question about how do we know what the success we've done over 50 years. And I think that little reflection you've just had of the journey through education and the different steps answers that question brilliantly. If that's a measure of the success of the journey over the last 50 years. So I just pop that in there while you just give yourself a little rest. So yeah, kia ora.
We've had failures in that 50 years, but we have had enormous success that much outweighs those failures. Those 50 years for me have seen, yes, we bought the fishery industry. We went from 10% in 1989, and now in 2026, we own over 50%. Some might measure it as a failure, though. I know Angeline Greensall's very critical because of the lower fishing stock. So you have to look at the measures of success very carefully. One of the key success levels is the recovery of our te reo Māori, even though it's still vulnerable in a recoverable state. It's not something that is now an ancient, something that's left on the shelf. It is now the language of communication. And you have to say, people like Timoti Karetu, people like Po Temara, people like Sir Po Temara, I'm forgetting they're all tar now, but people like Scotty Morrison and his partner, they have actually normalized it. They have encouraged non-Māori. So I have Chinese friends, Filipino friends, Pākehā friends, all in classes now, really loving learning our language, really loving what the language is a door to, the culture that they have chosen to reside within for the rest of their life and the generations of their children and grandchildren that are born here. I have seen more Pākehā, not reactive, like my dad. My dad never liked me when I used to growl and put the way he spoke Māori. It was terrible. We used to have big fights. I can say that now and I don't get the same reaction. People are genuinely sensitive to the importance of respect of a person's name, the kupu, of the mana of that kupu, and the interactions to create good relationships between people. We have 21 radio stations. We had a Māori television station after we fought. We have, I think, I'm not a FOMA fan, but I do advise them on something like 70 billion at one time, but it might be over to 160 billion now worth of assets, and that have grown, not through treaty settlements, most of them too. It's through the efforts of landowning groups like Pāringaringa up there, like my Rotoiti 15, Rotoman Corporation down here. Those groups were born by my grandfather and my grandmother and my granduncles. They never took a cent when they set up those incorporations and trusts. They used to work every day for them, and now they're trying to, the benefit of their hard work has come to the fruition in our time, and we now have the capacity with our bankers, our lawyers, too many lawyers, whānau, go and be a dentist, okay? Too many of us, but they are also being tempered in the capitalism options of development by the kura kaupapa teachers, by those of us that are looking at alternative economic systems as ways of ensuring well-being, of the ecological damage that is being done by the climate change crisis, which is requiring them to invest in different ways. I've seen the emphasis of boards to move to real simple things like here in Te Tiriti, we want 14 lakes really fresh and healthy, but we want 14 swimmable lakes to be maintained. We want 2 of the worst of our lakes to actually be really maybe put on a rahui for a while. I don't think we would have had those discussions 50 years ago. And the good thing over Christmas here in Te Tiriti, we had this golden clam thing coming in from Waikato and Taranaki, and we had a whole group set up, Pākehā Māori, all people who own homes by the Tarawera River, the Rotoiti River, Kaituna River, Rotoiti Lake and Rotorua Lake, work together. They actually fundraise together to keep the golden clams out. I see a lot of movements of cooperation and collaboration like that now that I never saw 40 years. But I also, don't kid myself, while that's happening, there's this deep racist strategy going on, trying to deprive us of the benefit of our own resources and trying to prioritize external access to those resources from third parties like the Department of War in the US to precious resources that could be utilized for our own well-being in other ways. So we've had, we've had some abject mistakes, I can talk about Te Tiriti. When we're going through the fishery settlement, we bought a boat. None of us ever saw the boat because the boat sunk, That's really one of the problems. There was little capacity at that time. We didn't insure the boat, so we lost a significant amount of money. I doubt that would happen now, given the kinds of development protections that our governance attitudes are given, but also the accountabilities. Our people are making their own governors very accountable. Now I have to move to the Māori party dramas and what's happening with Green and Labour to finish some of the things that I want to criticise for. The kai tangata syndrome is entering into that realm in Kāwanatanga. It's sad. It was inevitable though, because I think there was a deliberate effort from the kind of language of destruction of mana that they were confronting in Parliament every day. For Hana Te Maipi, Hana Te Hemara, Mokopuna, to be challenged the way she was for simply doing a haka, it made her famous on the world stage, and it made those that actually initiated that challenge look really, really like people who want to demean the next generation and who actually did not have any love for the first culture of this country. That will go down, I think, in the history books because of the unequal treatment that was given to her. She was given a suspension for what she did, which is a haka, when in previous times, somebody had a fisticuffs in the Parliament, someone else had a mimi in a flower pot in the Parliament. They didn't get a stand down like that. That was a terrible behaviour, but she was highlighted. She was made to feel embarrassed. She was targeted to feel the enormity of whakaiti in front of them. And that causes the dynamics of separation, of withdrawal. And I feel that that also impacted on the nature of the relationships between each of the members of parliament that we have. No one has the same universal thinking. There is not this homogenous view in the Māori world. We must respect difference, and the young people will be more different than us. We must respect people that have come from being a fisherman to going into parliament, and their language is quite different than someone who's a lawyer. We must respect those that have the power of Te Reo Māori, who are orators, who are tohunga, but there must be patience too, as other people are allowed to put their ideas, which are different. Difference enables equality to thrive if we can manage conciliation of those ideas. We can't use our power as leaders, as presidents of organisations to oppress and suppress. And we certainly can't use the power of national organisations to suppress the mana and dignity of hapū-led governance structures for parliamentary processes. And that's what I think we are failing to grapple. And you shouldn't be using these AGMs as ways to deny participation in open forums. You should be encouraging wānanga. The sad thing, we had to go to a Pākehā court and it's a wonderful decision for me that's been trying to get tikanga recognised as our own law, because the judge there is absolutely brilliant in the way he managed the kaua of the Māori Party, its internal operations, to find, I think, the right solution. Well, it must be, because they're not appealing. But it would have been much better if we could mediate that outcome to an outcome of kupu mana, of one of mutual respect, of honouring difference, of being important in the way we balance outcomes. Now, the Māori Party, they're up in front at the moment, but Greens and Labour, I'm sorry, you're not the second Māori Party, and you got a bloody cheek to claim that. You are not to use the false dichotomy, the false imposter syndrome, to substitute the values upon which you were built as ones that are from the Māori world. Yes, there is common themes in our unity, in our kotahitanga. Yes, there are practices which naturally require collaboration and synergy, but the site of power of rangatiratanga vests ki ngā rangatira ki ngā hapū, if we go to the first line of the treaty. And yes, you have members of your organisation that are rangatira and have hapū support, but you don't actually elevate that to any veto right within your party on policies that may impact Māori. So I have a real problem when those essentially culturally different parties, they are born out of different circumstances, are now trying to substitute and elevate themselves just to pati our votes. It's not a reasonable approach. It's a demeaning approach. It's a false imposter syndrome. Stop doing it, because I actually want us to work with parties on the left. But parties on the left must also know that kāwanatanga was a delegated authority under Te Tiriti by virtue of that preamble. And the rangatiratanga must be respected as being the responsibility of and held by kaupapa Māori, Māori institutions, Māori people, iwi and hapū for future generations. So my last kind of comment as we move forward is we need to actually look at constitutional change. And when we need it, we need to hui about it. In South Africa, after Nelson Mandela was released, they had over 10,000 hui. Moana Jackson started that journey. He had 4,000 hui. In those hui, there were constitutional models put up to look at the dynamics of what we need to do. I have always said that we need something above Parliament to make a deliberate decision of intervention when they overstep. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The Supreme Court said in the Wairarapa Moana case that Wairarapa Moana had rights and interests in water in the dams on the Waikato River, and notwithstanding that ruling, after something of 20 years of fighting, Parliament went to actually extinguish the effect of that decision by negotiating a treaty settlement, which actually ignored that finding. That finding shows that that's an excessive abuse of power by the Parliament, in my view, and we should have something that can trigger that. I've always thought about setting up something like the Guardians of Rangatiratanga and Kāwanatanga, so that we have kupu mana guiding how decisions are made accountable. Or we make some constitutional arrangements which mean that executive action can actually be the subject of judicial review. But all that lawyer stuff costs too much money and takes too much time. I'd like 3 guardians from the Māori world, statesmen and women, who can actually act as kaitiaki for this nation, and 3 non-Māori who are actually invited to share this obligation of finding balance and harmonisation in our country that prevents the excesses of and abuse of power, that prevents the excesses of racism and the ideas of superiority over Māori, that looks to positivism and human rights, equality, ideas and practices, that is there as the conscience of the nation, in the same way that Paul Thames said the Waitangi Tribunal should be recognised as the conscience of the nation, because their decisions, their deliberations give effect to the peaceful governance and promise of coexistence that Te Tiriti bore. Until we have the discussion about constitutional mechanisms like that, we will forever be subject to the coalition of chaos potential that we've seen in the last 3 years, when people come into Parliament deliberately to bring down ideas, not because they're wrong, but because they are losing power. The elites in the nation saw that they were losing power. The Hobson's pledges of the world saw that they did not have an assertion of morality anymore, because of course their own numbers had been convicted, many of them, of terrible things, indecent assaults, pornography. They'd all gone to jail from that. So, we got to really, really be clear as we move forward that our obligation is to protect the peace and good governance of this country. That obligation is an inherited one. Those rights existed before Te Tiriti and He Whakaputanga, but were cemented in those organisational frameworks. And we cannot shirk from that, no matter how hard it is. We must look after each other. We must work together. And, to use Kingi Haitea's ideas, we must be Māori every day. And Māori don't hate every day. They love. Aroha tētahi ki tētahi. Mate a one tētahi ki tētahi. Those are the values of coexistence that guide us in and out of the marae. Our manuhiri are treated better than the tangata whenua. And those things ensure peace and harmony. And that's the kind of values that should guide a treaty vision for the next 50 years. But I would be happy if it just guided us through the next 3 years. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Wow. Thank you, Annette. So many thought-provoking, action-inspiring kōrero. Thank you for taking us and reminding us that we start from where we came from, and you reminded of us of that by highlighting and bringing forward all those many great leaders that we sometimes forget to acknowledge, like Eva, like Sid, like Mona, and many others you have raised. We too sometimes forget the parts of the journey we've been on, like the fiscal envelope and the response of Dahi Ka. Many people have really embraced the kōrero of little fires of hope, of connection to our whenua. That in grasping and holding on to that notion of ahika and what it truly means. There's been some questions coming through around, and you've started to go there with the constitutional change kōrero. But when we were talking the other day, you also talked a little bit about, you know, about how do we kind of develop this notion of regionalising our planning as Māori, and then looking to see using Waitangi as an opportunity to come together, to share, to pakamana, to all that sort of stuff. Would you like to share a little bit about that as a solution to going forward?
So when we vision how we do it, because I think we spent a lot of time already in the last 50 years on what's wrong, I always go back to our founding documents, our sister documents, He Whakaputanga and Te Tiriti. He Whakaputanga is quite brilliant in providing a blueprint of what we might do to work through relationships between and amongst Māori in ways that uphold our values. Now, they say in its text that we should go back from Waitangi every year, and we should regionally meet and then come back to Waitangi the next year and make laws in our own kaupapa that protect our certain environment, or develop ideas so that we uphold te mana motuhake. That's the term more relevant when discussing whakaputanga than tino rangatiratanga. I think that is really what we have to do. That it's really, really hard to avoid individualization, because of course that's what Pākehā systems and capitalism thrive on. They dissipate power by individual factors of production, by individualizing title to a lot of people, and making that hard to consolidate so that you can actually make change. I think we as Māori need to find ways that we can consolidate that in a federal way. So I'd like to go home, for example, and work with the peoples of Mātātua, Aotearoa and Tūwharetoa, whānau apunui and whakatohea, to develop climate change strategy, or utilisation of resources strategy, or working out ways that we can look after each other's well-being in economic and political and social strategies. Because quite often in Rotorua, we've become the hub for the homeless, the hub for people released out of prison, not because they want to come here, but they're forced to come here because that's where the social agencies like HUDs, like Kaikōrerō, like the MSD actually have a significant foothold. So that's the kawanatanga agencies, which are there for everybody, are actually consolidated. So people are being forced to leave their tribal domains to do that. I would like to see, if we take the idea that, yes, as Māori, we agreed when we signed to be an independent state, we would use time together in our regions and take ideas that we could make into law. We could decide, for example, that we're not going to take any crayfish this year. You know, it doesn't have to be big, because crayfish is under threat. We could decide, for example, that we're going to limit water extraction because the bat over there is under threat of extinction. Those are small things we could look at in an ecological sense, but, you know, we could look at big things too. We could say that we want a universal basic income for all Māori, and that we're going to lobby for change with the kāwanatanga so that every household has guaranteed minimum standards of wealth. We could make sure that we're going to actually decry the use of nuclear weapons or weapons of war to destroy indigenous populations around the world. And we could make really good law about that and declarations about that by ourselves. And we were starting to do that during the fisheries debate and the foreshore and seabed debate. We had the declaration of Paeroa about the foreshore and seabed matters. We went at the invitation of the Hauraki Māori Trust Board and the Iwi Leaders Forum, and we had wānanga over 2 days, and we made the declaration of Paeroa. And it was a huge declaration that what they were doing after the Ngāti Apa decision with the Foreshore and Seabed Act was wrong. That declaration was taken to Waitangi. Next minute, we had, 60,000 on a march to Wellington, denying and decrying what was happening with the Foreshore and Seabed. So there was an activism element to it, there was an analysis element, but there was a collectivism strategy, because after Pairod, you had to go home and organise your people. That's one example. I want to use another earlier example, women's refuge. Māori women's refuge were one of the, I think, paramount sources of setting up collectives of whānau and hapū to help women who have been badly beaten by their partners, and efforts to eliminate violence looked at strategies that would include kaumātua, men and women. But of course, the women's movement did not want any men. There was a kind of a blacklisting of all men, but that was the antithesis of many of the values of those in the early stages of the women's refuge movement. So they had 4 cornerstones in their values documents that they set up, which would guide the praxis amongst themselves and would enable Māori refugees to actually develop iwi relationships that were safe and focused to the goal of elimination of violence against women and children. Another one we we've collectivized was the United Nations Declaration of the Indigenous Peoples. This is before the Mātike Mai. Moana went around because he was on the working group on Indigenous Peoples, and we were meeting with all these flash people from the United Nations, and we were developing methods. We did the submission, Hinamo Aotearoa, Dame Mirasazi, Aroha Meads went to Geneva, and they put a clause in the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People to ensure that we protected the status and mana of women and children. Now, these are ideas that came from regional movements, coming together, crystallizing the ideas in Waitangi, going to the international stages, the national stages, and showing an assertive kotahitanga that would not ever give or say we ceded our sovereignty. They are expressions of our sovereignty, and more importantly, of our values of collectivity, of our values of caring for each other and caring for the resources that we have the responsibility to look after. We can do it, whānau. We just have to organise ourselves a bit better. The iwi leaders isn't quite like that yet, although it's moving there. My problem with the iwi leaders, they aren't organic enough. They seem to be self-appointed people that are looking for a job. You know, when I said earlier, some of them need to move on because we're all too old, so kia ora, okay? But, you know, that's one of the things. But iwi leaders really need to look at their structures. They can't keep having the super iwi, Tainui and Ngaitahu getting all these separate meetings and all these advantages while the other 73 languish. So there needs to be much more collectivism. And you don't just come to Waitangi for the pōheri and to listen to Winston abuser. One of the key things I've always gone is go down to Taurangatira. That's where all the kōrero happens. Make sure you acknowledge and honour those people that gathered before Waitangi to debate whether they even wanted to give up the right to invite people into our country. You know, we can do it. I see it happening in organisations like Kura Kaupapa, like Ngā Kura Iwi, like Hungaroia Māori, like the PSA Māori movement, like Te Tiriti. I see it happening. But I just wished we would grapple with that metal of unity, because quite often we say it's too hard and we make it too hard to follow through. And yes, in the constitutional change dynamics, I would like us to establish our own house. Have we got a minute to read out something that we came out of the constitutional group from?
Yes, you've got a couple of minutes.
Okay. So I was on the constitutional group with great people like Raniera and a whole lot of people were in this committee that were looking at, for the iwi leaders, what would be a constitutional framework for the Hawaii Kau. And this is what we came up with. Ko te tāhuhu o te whare, ko te tiriti o Waitangi. Ko te pautoko manoa, ko te reo Māori. Ko ngā heke, ngā mātāpono, ngā ahuatanga, hei whakapū mau i te mana o te tiriti. Ko ngā paupau, ngā āpiha o te krauna, ngā kaikaui te kaupapa o te ao Māori. Kei te pau tuarongo te mauri o te mana Māori mo tuhake. Kei te pau kaiawha, te kaitō i Aotearoa ki tōna mana. Ko te matapihi te whakakitenga atu ki te ao i tūmanako hiana. Ko te kuaha te tomokanga, i hau mai ai te nui te roa te mano. e rua ona maihi, ko te maihi Māori, ko te maihi Krauna. E ara e te Hawaii ki hau tanga o Aotearoa. So we have conceptually constructed a house where there is a bicultural part and recognition of those which coexist with us, but we have control of the pai within the Māori dynamics and values that we possess. And I found that committee as a really good think tank, because I think we need those as well to assist us in planning for the regionalism and then the nationalism without giving up our hapū rangatiratanga, because I am a hapū fundamentalist. I always get worried about these Ngāti Whakau in town when they start talking for Te Arawa. I'm picking out tūturu, you know? So I've got to make sure that I'm not being seen to be covered by someone else's blanket. So you've got to see yourself in these things, and that's why participatory rights and not just letting the super iwi take over is really important.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Just before we sort of I try and pull us all the key things that you've said, which has been fabulous, and lots of people have been acknowledging the bits along the way. There's a kaupapa that's come up in the chat, and it goes like this. The pressure on hapū within Ngāpuhi to settle is ramping up ahead of the election. The Crown incentivising the few to sell out the rangatiratanga of the many. How do we resist without falling into kai tangata syndrome? How do we leverage the upcoming election to shine a light on the truth of treaty settlement and the extinguishment of our treaty rights?
So I think Ngāpuhi is the biggest challenge facing us, and I don't want to speak with Ngāpuhi, but I have come to the compromised view that tino rangatiratanga is not for the Crown to give or confirm. We own it and possess it. So that's one of the first thing we need wānanga on whānau. And each hapū and collective of hapū may have a different view on that. Not everyone's the same, you know. Some of our people in Te Arawa hold firm to the fact we didn't sign Te Tiriti, and their Te Tiriti is the Fenton Agreement. And, you know, we've got to respect the different elements of engagement with the Crown that has occurred with collectives of hapū. So if rangatiratanga is to be given respect from a ground up, then that's the first question. If that region of hapū have decided they wish to participate, you need to be sure that they're not just doing it because they're being forced or seduced by the Crown, but there may be legitimate reasons why they want to do it. One of the things that I worry about is that since the first treaty settlements, you know, you've got these billion groups that have been established, while many that haven't settled are pohara. The two groups that are obvious is Ngāpuhi and Raukawa. You haven't settled. So there needs to be the grappling with the practical reality that there needs to be some kind of development strategy around that. If you are hell-bent, and there were kaumātua that I represented during the claims that nothing happens till you have the sovereignty issues resolved, then you must also accept that there is a likelihood that there will be this unevenness in the way government treats certain people because of the way treaty settlements are now being utilised to influence co-governance arrangements. So that's just my view on it. I know I spent 20 years on those claims. The wonderful thing about the claims from the Paparahi o Tiraki is that we have definitive findings that we never ceded sovereignty. We had definitive findings that the last bastion who have protected the Te Tiriti since its inception are the peoples of Ngāpuhi, and your special status must go down in the eons of history and the future of the nation as those guardians of that taonga. But I don't want you to be treated as second-class Māori because your access to resources is being diminished by virtue of a status as a settled iwi and a status as an unsettled iwi. That dichotomy is unfair and is prejudicial to the well-being of your future generations, and you have to find a solution for that.
Kia ora. Thank you. Sorry, you go, Liz.
Yeah, just another question quickly, Annette. It's come up. How, in your view, can tangata tiriti be most helpful right now?
One of the things that I think tangata tiriti need to do is to write to their own, because you need an obligation to their own, to expose the false identities of people like David Seymour and all of them. That you should hold Hobson's pledge to account for the white hatred that they are promoting actively every day in their misinformation campaign of social media. That you should, as you have done always in the last 3 years, maintain vigilance for any of those public hui called by Hobson's pledge and protest, and maintain that vigilance to say what Kendrick Lamar said. They're not like us. You know, those Pākehā are not like us. They're just those 5 people in that room. You know, that I don't know if you know rapping songs, but I love it, okay? But it's a really good song that he writes that inspired me. They're not like us. We are of a people that have committed to this nation on the values of peace and harmony and mutual respect. And we do not want that undermined by a racist agenda that is out to erase the history of this country and rewrite the values of this country on notions of superiority and the fallacy that Māori somehow are an ancient peoples that have actually either assimilated themselves to such a position they are unrecognisable as those that possess their own laws, their own rights, their own responsibilities and obligations.
Kia ora. Kia ora. There's a number of things, Annette, that have stood out for me this morning, and from the kōrero, there were a lot of people have been picking up on things. The reaffirming of kupu mana and where that sits, that we sometimes forget about the preamble and what it lays out for us, and what it means for us individually and collectively in terms of our responsibility and response to the preamble. Hawaii ki hautanga, you talked about that, and I've interpreted that as a new place, a new world, or building on what we've got, something to aspire to. You talked about that in relation to the deeds, thoughts, and practices of us individually and collectively. And then you talked about things that we maybe should think about. Let me reframe it. Things we need to get real about if we truly want to take on the next 3 to 15 to 20 years of entrenching our place as Māori. You talked about constitutional change and the need for us to have wānanga. Now, my question is, who do we look to start the ball rolling? Who will put their hand up and say, okay, I'm here. I had the great privilege of going to one of Mona Jackson's hui in Albany around Mātiki Mai, and it changed the course of my thinking and my actions. And so who would we look to, Annette? Who's coming through? As you mentioned, a lot of fabulous young people under 40 with lots of way with words and technology. And is it them that we need to be looking to lead?
No, you look in the mirror. You know that Michael Jackson song? The man in the mirror. Sorry, don't blame it on everybody else to lead. You are our leaders. You will lead the change we want.
Cool.
And you will draw inspiration naturally from the change we seek by those that will facilitate and join you in that journey. Cool. And there are activators. I'm frightened about Veronica Tawhai. She's got a decolonisation strategy. Ani Mikaere, go and do her law and philosophy course if you want to change. At Awanuiarangi in the Bay of Plenty here, they got wonderful courses on how we protect our waterways, and they are inspirational for constitutional change because they're asking us to do things, never mind the Resource Management Act. Look in the mirror. The man in the mirror is the person that will make the change we seek. And read. Stop reading I'm like this, swipe on those reels, on that machine, on those phones. Stop that. Read. read all the inspirational thinking that's gone down. Most of it is now being digitized, and we now need to look at it. Support kaupapa Māori initiatives. You know, just keep doing the things we're doing. We're 1 million powerful now. Cool. And if we can get 1 million powerful thinking and believing in the change we seek, we will influence the other 4 million in ways that is no turning back.
Cool, thank you. So there we go. Folks, we've been told, look in the mirror. It's up to us to continue to do the work that we're doing, to inspire, to lead, to every little bit counts. So we've been told nobody's going to lead us. We've got to lead ourselves. The other thing you talked about in terms of considering is the regional consolidation and coming together and looking at what's needed in our area and coming up with strategies to address these things. And I absolutely buy into that. And one of the things that I've been although I shouldn't say this now that I've been told to look in the mirror, but one of the things I've been telling my sister with the money she has and a range of things, come on, let's get us together up here and talk about what we're going to do this year for voting and who are we going to get behind, and let's get on and make it happen. Nobody else is going to do it, so let's make it happen. So that's, for this year anyway, is a good place to start, Annette. Let's regionalise on what the heck we're going to do.
Oh, exactly. So educate what voting means is the key. So educate, organise for action and liberation. The action is you want everyone in your whānau to vote who is over 18. You have to start preparing for them now. You've got to get them on the Māori vote and you've got to get them registered, okay, with the proper address. At the latest poll, if we get 4 Māori party seats, they will hold the balance of power on the latest poll. But, you know, these polls are changing all the time. So we have got to educate, organise action for our liberation from the yoke of colonialism and the threat of the chaos of this coalition that it has been positing since they've got into power. And we need to do that as a priority, whānau. So every kapahaka, I mean, Te Tiriti, we get 10,000 in the kapahaka and we get 10, well, about 100 at a protest. So, you know, that says a lot too, you know. So you've got to find the people that will speak to the people. So maybe we need to get some of these kapahaka kings and queens to do some of the encouragement. But I also think that 17 to 18 to 25-year-old, they're starting to hold the balance of power. And look what happened in Tainui last time, Tainui Waikato. You know, Hana went against Nanaia, both wonderful women. And I think it was the power of the youthful vote that pushed her over the line. And so I think we need to educate, organise for action. Now I want to speak to the political parties. I want you to actually start forging some relationships together instead of waiting for you to get into power and decide who you want to sleep with. Let us know now whether or not you're going to be willing to work with independent groups like the Māori Party or someone who stands as an independent. Because if you aren't, then I will be really thinking about whether I should vote with you or not. Because frankly, that's the problem. They want all the power exclusively and use Māori as an add-on. But our 7 seats are more than an add-on. They have a political role. They are there to vision for our populations, which is 1 million. And it's our role to make sure that these other parties are accountable to our status as rangatiratanga, being effective, giving effective thought through those kawanatanga parties. So and you know, if you're thinking of standing, it's nearly too late because they're already making decisions. So that's another option I would have thought about. If you think you're onto it, put yourself out there. Don't be shy, because you know, that's one of the things with these big parties. They've already determined who they want to go up.
Kia ora. Annette, look, just before Marty, you know, just brings perhaps another question in. I'm just looking at the time now, and it's 10 to 12. You know, we've been really fortunate this morning to have you with us. some of the quotes that you've given us this morning. I know just reading through the chat that chats that have been coming through, you know, like we must not use leadership as a means of suppression, that just because of difference. We must step aside, and if we're 60 plus, which holds me a little bit, given that we have an election happening here this afternoon with the results being put out there. But it's, you know, your kōrero around the kai tangata syndrome, your kōrero and so many different areas of kupu mana, taking us back to even the story of Tangaroa and Tāne Mahuta, and you know the energy from your kōrero this morning that has given so many of those who have joined, to the point of to the moderators asking that the dialogue of today's this fireside chat, the ahika, starting right there, that yes, this will be available to everyone. There will be an unedited version, and I think that's the one that people will want to hold on to, Annette, given all of those gems that you've laid on our table before us, to look in the mirror, you know, and take on board these gems that you've left with us to make a difference in our space and our hapū. Just on that, I just want to add that here in Te Huku, there have been a number of wānanga kaupapa that are happening on our marae, under tikanga, under reo, under waiata. And from today's conversation, the Constitution, what does mana motuhake mean for us at a hapū, at a marae level, needs to be part of those wānanga kaupapa. But I just want to share back to all of the participants that the edited version of today's Fireside Chat with Annette will be available. You will receive an email for this session, and then later on there'll be an edited version. I'm saying don't edit this kōrero, please, whānau, who are responsible, because the gems within it have been too important for us participating, but more importantly, it needs to be out there for more to access and to hear this brilliant kōrero. So thank you, Annette. I'm just going to hand back to Marty to do the final wrap up, and then close with our karakia. Kia ora, Marty.
Kia ora. What am I walking away with? What are we all going to walk away with today, Annie? Look in the mirror. Change is in our hands. You gave us 3 key power: activism, analysis, and collective organisation. And if we individually take that on board and take it back to our fireside, to our own fireside, to our hapū fireside, to our iwi ahika, then we become the leaders of change. We become the advocates for Hawaii ki hau. We become the enactors of kupu mana. So thank you so very much for your inspiration, Annette, for your wide knowledge, for the way you took us on this journey, making sure we never forget the past to inform the way we go forward, and we must always stop and look back and check to move forward. So he mihi nui ki a koe me tō whānau hoki. One thing Lisa didn't say this morning is that Annette is a great mum, a great nana, great daughter. So she's mana wahine. So
she's my she-hero. She's my shero.
So he mihi kia koe, Annette. Thank you so much for giving us this amazing time, this amazing kōrero, and I know everybody on screen joins with me and so thanking you and wishing you the very best as you continue on this journey that you have started. So I'll give it back to you, Lisa, to whakakapia tēnei hui. Kia ora.
Nō reira, anō te mihi ki a koe e te rangatira, e te tuakana Annette. Ngā mihi nunui mai a mātou katoa e whakarongo atu ki a koe I tēnei ata. Ai, e haere tonu a hau I te raro, maku e tuake I ngā wā, e kōrero, nā taku kōrero I raro te panikoti o Annette, taku hero. Nā, koe ngā tāne, nā te mea e whakahāpai tia ngā tāne, e rua. So, nō reira, kia koe e te tuakana, e te rangatira, e te shiro, ngā mihi atu kia koe I ten. That's what they should be calling the next, what's your rugby team, or is it rugby league? So, Cyclone Sykes is done it once again, whānau. Nō reira, ka nui tēnā mihi, nā te mea he mihi aroha kia koe mo tō wā, tō kōrero, tō pukenga I wainganui tēnei ahika, te kōrero o te ahika, nō reira, ka nui tēnā tātou mā. Annette, final word before we say karakia.
Just look after each other. It's hard at the moment. We're not going to have petrol, and we're going to look to people who've got planted kai, because I don't think we're going to have groceries easy. Just look at your neighbours. Don't forget about them. Some of them won't actually reach out, but you need to reach out to them. And just be really proud that we have survived for the next 1,000 years. Just keep that in your mind. We've come through worse things than we are facing today, but the next few years will be some of the hardest we've ever struck. So I love you all. I want you to go home with a message of peace and love, because we've got to look after each other at this hard time. Kia ora.
Ka pai tēnā. Nō reira tātou mā, ko tēnei te wā mutinga, inoi tātou. Kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmeri. Māori ora tātou katoa. Kia ora.